with Miss Shireen, I'm kind of like a dog with a bone sometimes. And if I have my own questions, I chase it down until I got an answer I can live with. And when you start chapter 9, verse 17 and 18, we're going to look at a different angle, different part of that. So if you ask me a question after a Bible study, I want you to know that, like, usually I'm like, I got to figure this out. Sometimes I will forget what the question was, but I like to run it down. Now, there's a theological term, and the term is hermeneutics. Give you a big wild guess, that's a wild big word, but it's really how do we interpret the Bible. We joke a lot of times with God, like when we get to heaven, there's certain questions that I want to ask. Chris joked, like, what was Paul's thorn in the flesh? Doesn't tell us. We can guess. I got my guesses. You probably got your guesses. But it doesn't really spell out the answer for you. And so sometimes you do have to look for ways to interpret the Bible. And I think there are two very important keys in interpreting the Bible anytime. Number one is always context. It's like we really need to get sort of out of this habit of going, okay, Lord, tell me something today, and sticking our finger somewhere and go, oh, that's what the Lord's trying to tell me today. Because the context and everything around what he says matters. For instance, love Tim Tebow, and Tim always put Philippians 4:13 on his eye black. And we're like, oh, well, I can be a world champion if for that. The context of that was Paul saying, I can live a good life, a nice life, whatever. I can be good with a lot, and I can be good with a little. It wasn't really saying this is how you be Superman, is by claiming Philippians 4:13. The context is very important in those matters and in those situations. So number one, I think context is really important that you grasp it. For instance, you can make an argument for literally anything if you just take a few words from here and add them to a few words over there. You can make the Bible say whatever you want it to say, and you can get there. So context is always very important, that you look at these verses in the terms of the context in which they're being said. What leads up to it? And of course, with the Gospels, you've got Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So you have a lot of times 4 different sets of eyes on the situation. Luke, as you can imagine, being, best we know, is a doctor. He's very detail-oriented. In the book of Luke, you're going to get a few more details than you would in some others. And so that's very, very important. And then also, the second thing is, one of the things that I love to do is let the Bible interpret the Bible. So in other words, like, the Lord has not shared with you something that is contrary to what the Bible says. You may hear people say, well, I got a fresh word from God. God's word in his Bible is sufficient for all of it. And so when the Bible says one thing in one passage and you're questioning, you got to let the Bible interpret itself. And so that's what we're kind of doing to get into this. But we are in Mark chapter 9. If you remember, that's where we were last week. And we dealt with the faith that this dad had. The dad comes to Jesus and he's like, man, my boy, he's been messed up since he was born little. Your disciples tried, they failed. And then Jesus gets sort of sounding like he's a little mad with the people and with the disciples. And he makes that comment. Then he looks at the dad and says, anything's possible if you have faith. And then we see things happen, and we love to talk about our faith. And we like to talk about how strong our faith there is or isn't, not necessarily the fact that it is in God, and God is strong. But, so there's a couple questions Sunday or Wednesday night that kind of, again, it's one of those things where it doesn't spell it out for you. Like, for you that are ladies in the room, I'm a dude, and I'm a dude of all dudes. If you want me to do something, spell it out for me. Give me a 1, 2, 3, 4 bullet outline list. Do not assume I know what you're thinking. Do not assume that I can read between any lines or know any social cues. Like, if you want me to do something, you need to burp, 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 burp. And then I can take that list and go, okay, 1, checked it. Did that? 2, checked it. Maybe some other dudes in the room are like that a lot too. I love that there are people that can whip up meals with no directions, and I'm like, you got to spell out not only what the directions are, what the recipe calls for, what aisle I find it in the grocery store, because don't make me walk all over that place, because I'll be walking down a motor oil aisle looking for some syrup or something. I mean, that ain't my thing, and so I wish the Lord would give us that a lot of times. I think, though, because, one, God is not the author of confusion, he gives us an answer, and sometimes I think he expects us to trust him for the rest of the answer as well. But there's an important question that's asked in this text. And so let's just check the text one more time. Out of the crowd, one man answered him, "Teacher, I brought my son to you. He has a spirit, makes him unable to speak. Wherever it seizes him, it throws him down, and he foams at the mouth, and he grinds his teeth and becomes rigid. So I asked your disciples to drive it out, but they couldn't." And so he replied to them, "You unbelieving generation, how long will I put up with you? How long must I put up with you? Bring him to me." So they brought him to him, and when the spirit saw him, it immediately convulsed the boy. He fell to the ground, and he rolled around, and he was foaming at the mouth. And Jesus asked, "How long has this been happening to him?" And his father said, "From childhood. And many times it's thrown him even into a fire or into water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, please have compassion on us and help us." And Jesus said to him, "If you can, everything is possible to the one who believes." Now, if you just go no context, one verse, you might say, "Well, I believe I can be Michael Jordan. And if I believe it hard enough, you can take me out there to that basketball goal and I'll dunk it from the free throw line. And we can go try that, and I'm going to blow an Achilles." You might think, "Man, I can be the next whoever." You know, they say attitude is everything. No, not always. And so we understand then, we would think, okay, if you can, yes, God can. He absolutely can. What he likely does is give us what we need to serve him. Now, some of us think that's got to be a jet or a Rolls Royce or a Corvette, and sometimes it's a Pinto. That's all in God's will, and it's all in his choice. So he can do it, and I believe that God can do literally anything, but I trust him enough to know that he has a will in a way that may not be mine. So we go past that, and it says, immediately the father of the boy cried out. He says, "I do believe, help my unbelief." And we talked about how that was a little weird, a little oxymoronic in the fact that he's saying, "I believe, but I have unbelief," but I resonate with that. Like we always talk about, we believe God can do everything, but there are times in our life, man, it just hits us square in the face, and it just goes. And so Jesus then sees a crowd rapidly coming together, and he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, "You mute and deaf spirit, I command you, come out of him and never enter him again." Then it came out. It was shrieking and convulsing him violently. The boy became like a corpse, so that many said, "He's dead." But Jesus, taking him by the hand, raised him and stood up, and he went into the house. His disciples asked him privately, "Why couldn't we drive it out?" And that's the question that I want us to deal with tonight. Why couldn't we, from the disciples' point of view, drive it out? Why can't I come to you, whop you on the forehead, and all your problems go away? Why is it that they couldn't in that instance? Now, again, I believe the answer takes some in use of interpretation. Context is really important, right? Number one. And also, you let the Bible speak for the Bible. So he tells them in his answer, and this is kind of like my go-to. If I'm wondering why, I'm just going to go with what it said. And so he says to them, this kind can come out by nothing but prayer, and some translations include the word fasting. Now, I bet you prayed before. I'm not sure how many of us could honestly say we fasted before. That's a little bit more of an intense level of doing things. And sometimes it's a religious rite for some people, and they like to announce it. And we say, oh, I'm fasting. Like you get to like Mardi Gras week, and people are like, oh, I'm going to give up X, Y, and Z for this. And to me, as soon as you tell everybody you're giving up something for that, you just broke rule number one of fasting. We don't brag about it. The second thing is, if it's so bad that you need to give it up, you need to give it up for more than a week or a month or whatever it is. You probably just need to do away with it altogether. And you don't need to have that in your life. And the third thing is, the Bible teaches us that when we fast, let's say if we're fasting from food, when we get hungry, our job is to do what? Pray. Not like a quick little prayer, but like I'm legit not eating, and that hunger reminds me to fervently go into prayer. That's another sort of level to me of your prayer life. And that's a little more intense. Some of y'all, like, let's think about it. We get to Thanksgiving dinner and we stuff ourselves. And we think, I'm never going to eat again. And all of a sudden, we believe in fasting. Problem is, about 4.5, 5 hours later, we're hungry again. Because that appetite's never fully and finally satisfied. And so giving up food, going without food, doing something like that means, man, I am into this. And so I tended to believe Jesus when he says, this kind only comes out with prayer, and then again, some translations say fasting, but prayer. So what is he telling us then? That something is up with their prayer life. That's what I feel like he's getting at. And so I think there are a couple things Jesus is trying to tell us. Number one, perhaps there's a lack of faith. Sometimes we don't pray because we don't really believe God's going to do anything. And then other times, it's the fact that we quite often just don't really pray. We got a list of things to ask Jesus for. We got a series of begging, and God, if you'll get me out of this, then I'll do X, Y, and Z. But am I really in a spirit of prayer? So what Jesus does first is he rebukes the situation. Notice where he says, faithless people, basically. How long am I going to have to put up with you? And it sounds a little sarcastic. It sounds like he's a little perturbed. I think he probably was there. In fact, the Bible tells us, be angry and yet do not sin. So it's okay for him to be perturbed. And if you think about the Old Testament, the children of Israel were his chosen generation. It was his people. And he's like, you need to keep your covenant with me. And what did they do? Sometimes they did, and they were blessed. Sometimes they didn't, and they were punished. I bet Jesus probably looked at them a lot of times and was like, you faithless generation, man. And I wonder if he's sort of looking at that going like, not only are you not having to now sacrifice animals or anything weird, like I'm on the scene. You've got me. I'm right here. I have told you how to do it. How many times do your kids call you and ask the same question, or an employee at work, and you're like, I have explained you how to do this. I have told you how to do this. How do you not figure this out, right? And so I think he's a little perturbed, and I think, like Israel, that's us. We're an up and down kind of people, man. We some weeks we got it all together, and we're in our Bibles, and we're studying, and other weeks, was talking with a lady before church today, and a couple of her kids decided to read through the Bible in a year. Great. I'm excited about that. My first question goes, what happens when you hit Leviticus and Numbers? And I'm actually going to preach a sermon out of Lamentations this Sunday, but like those are not the way popular Bible passages. And so is that commitment there, does it stick when it gets hard? And that's kind of us. Sometimes, man, we had a great service, just the right song was sang, just the right sermon was preached, and all of a sudden I've done my Bible study 2 days in a row. I've prayed 3 days in a row, but then fourth day hits, and that's not such a good day. And we tend to go in a different direction. And I think what he's telling the father there is that everything, when he says to the dad, everything that you need is available through faith. And again, the terminology is important, that you need. Our wants and our needs are different things. I want a brand new truck. I do not need a brand new truck. I want a brand new putter. I need a brand new putter, if Carrie's listening. That's the thing. It's a little bit different. And so it's everything we need to serve the Lord is available to us through faith. Everything that we need. So the issue here with why he couldn't was not just technique to me, okay? It wasn't a matter of do I do the sign of the cross the right way or not? Do I use ash or whatever? It wasn't a matter of certain terminology. This is not Harry Potter sort of situation. It was not, to me, the technique. It was their spiritual dependence and trust in God that got them in a situation where they got in trouble. Because notice, they asked him privately. That's also, to me, important. And they said, Lord, why did we fail? You're going to hear me use the term and the word we several times here in just a moment, because that stood out to me. It shows them that, or shows us that, one, deliverance isn't automatic. Benny Hinn is a liar, and anybody like Benny Hinn is a liar. You can't just automatically whop somebody on the head and something happens. I watched a revival out of Lakeland, Florida, where a lot of people from this area went to, in the Greenville area went to, and this dude got up on stage to preach, and he brought a bag of charcoal with him, and he was going to preach fire down, and the Lord was going to light that bag of charcoal on fire. And he preached, and he prayed it, and he prayed it, and you know what happened? He brought the charcoal home with him. It did not light on fire. Nothing happened, and he looked like a fool. And you know what happened about 5 minutes later? The revival was over. It was done. And so it's not automatic, and it wasn't automatic even then for the apostles. And I think that in some ways they got this idea that it's now automatic. This is point and shoot. But they learn that it requires a deep reliance on God through prayer. And I don't mean like pray on Sundays and like pray over your meals. Can we just challenge ourselves to say, when we're thinking about prayer, the fact that you got a meal, you're already blessed. And I said it before and I'll say it again. You put crystals in front of you, don't even ask about blessing that. Right? We're already blessed. We should be asking the Lord to make us a blessing to others. So those kind of prayers that were like quick hitters and do this for me and do that for me, and then we're stuffing our faith. Let's make a challenge, because usually the Wednesday night crowd, y'all are like the core, the cream of the crop. Y'all are the Navy SEALs of the Navy when it comes to Christianity. Let's think of prayers different than that. Let's go, that's the bare minimum. How reliant am I on God? Right? Like when you get in the car, are you so reliant on God that we don't just assume the seatbelt's going to work, and we don't assume the pedal's going to work. Let's assume the brakes are going to fail, and I'm going to pray. And I am going to be so reliant on God through that. It's kind of like how we are when we get the bad news or the bad diagnosis. All of a sudden, everybody's praying in, and we're praying hard, and we're spiritual, and now we're raising our hands in prayer and everything. We're doing all of it. What about on Tuesday, man, when our team won Monday night? Everything's pretty good. I got money in my bank account. Is that same level of dependence right there? Is it still happening? And the other option I think they're kind of starting to learn is that, they may have been trying to act on some past successes instead of a present dependence on God. Just because God did something last week doesn't mean he's going to do the same thing next week. We need to be dependent upon God in that. And so the disciples, now look at this. Take your Bible, turn over a couple pages. Mark chapter 6. I know it's mentioned in a couple other places, but Mark 6 stands out. It's the same writer with the same point of view, the same angle. They had been given what we'll find, I think it's 6 verse 13. They had been given the authority to drive out demons. So, here's a couple questions to ask ourselves of this subject. So verse 13 or 12 says, they went out and they preached that people should repent. And they were driving out many demons, anointing many sick people with oil and with healing. So just 3 chapters earlier, they were given the authority to do it, right? So maybe there's one way of looking at it. One school of thought would be, for that time and for that occasion, God gave them that authority that did not then carry over until this time. That's one way of looking at it. But for me, I think it's important that we look back a hair and we realize from his teaching that during that time, the disciples didn't have very much. In fact, Jesus wouldn't let them go out with anything. One gospel writer says they were not allowed a walking stick. One gospel writer says they were allowed a walking stick. Now, it could have been just like in translation, one could be actually for walking, one can be for protection, right? So they were asked to go out in groups of 2 with what they had on their back, essentially. The Bible actually mentions that they let them have sandals. Like they let you, like God was trying to say to you, you need nothing, you don't need anything in this. You know what that does to me? It puts you in a place of total dependence on God for everything. Like I don't have a change of clothes. Look, I can go on a trip, a one-night trip, and I'll pack enough clothes for 4 days. I just because you just never know. It might be hot, it might be cold, I might eat too much crystals, I don't know. There's just going to have enough, too many Boy Scout days where you're prepared for everything, where you just got to, they're like, look, you get nothing. You go out, and you go, and you drive them out. And if you go to a house and they don't welcome you, you shake the dust off your feet and say, it's on you, brother. That's a lot of dependence on the Lord in that occasion. Now, another way of looking at it is authority. If you look at authority like permission, you have permission. I have a couple of buddies of mine that I play golf on the weekends with, and they're linemen. They have permission to do stuff with the electrical lines. But you know what they don't do? They don't just run up a pole and go grabbing lines, do they? They take that seriously. And they're very particular about it. And so perhaps one way of looking at it is that permission sort of equals the ability, but like a lineman, you better take every detail seriously. In fact, I equate that to, in some instances in the Bible, when the Bible speaks about, like, if you walk out the door and you see the devil himself, stand and fight him, right? And then the Bible tells us to flee sexual immorality. Because I think he understands that it's one thing to fight the devil, but the other thing doesn't look quite so the same. And so he's saying there's kind of a couple of things, like you have the authority to do it, but let's just don't go run out going, devil come out, when I hadn't prayed in a week. Because if the disciples were like you and I, as soon as they got their extra clothes back, they got their hokas back on their feet, they got a good jacket, they got a bath, they got a shower, they got a nap, and they got some food in them, they probably did the same thing you and I do. We start going, man, I did a good job. We did that. Look at this, man. Look at all the people we drove out. But in the moment when they had like the shirt on their back, nothing else, it was like, God, look at what God's doing. Look, I can't believe this is happening. And then somehow the devil gets in our ear and he goes, oh, look what you did. Can you do that again? Is he really going to do that every time? Would he really do that again? And so I think they had authority and they had experience in casting out the demons. They had clearly done that before. But I think we start to own in on this idea right here in that what they may not have is active faith in that moment. They may not have an ongoing prayerful dependence on God. Like they had the dependence on God when it was really, really hard and they had nothing on their back and they had nothing in their backpack and they didn't know where their next meal was coming from and where their next place to stay was coming from and all they had was each other. It's easy to rely on God in that moment, but all of a sudden now they're trying to do work, spiritual work, without spiritual power. And so I think the summary comes down to maybe one of these three options, and maybe all of them, of why they could not cast that demon out. Number one, could have just been their faith was weak. Could have just been that little voice creeped in that says, we've done this before. We joke, famous last words of a redneck, hey, y'all watch this? But it's also the famous last words of like Christians too, like we've done this before. Oh, we did this before. We did this 2 years ago, we did just fine, let's just go for it. And maybe that's what happened in their life was their faith had slowly creeped into, hey, we've done this before. This is easy. This is easy. Maybe their prayer life was lacking. I can believe it. There are, even in my life, times where I realized, dude, you should have prayed some more before you did that. Or you got yourself in a situation you weren't prayed up for. And you just never know when those moments are going to happen. You don't know when they're going to come. And then all of a sudden, you're in a time where you're tired. And so now this guy is calling, and the disciples, and he's asking the disciples, hey, can you cast this thing out for my boy? And they're like, yeah, just come on out. Jesus could do that. He has a direct link connection. But maybe they were grumpy. Maybe they didn't want to be woken up right then. Maybe they needed a beauty sleep. Maybe it was during the Georgia game and, you didn't want to talk spirituality right then and right there. Maybe it was just, and they weren't prayed up and they weren't ready. And then, of course, there's the option, and again, it could be all of them, that they'd gotten to a point where they relied on themselves. We was a big term. We can do this. We've done this before. We'll just kind of do it like we did last time. That's a scary place. We'll just do it like we did last time. I hate that phrase because we're looking for something fresh. And we need God to do something new. You want to make it real practical for a church? Well, we did fine last year on that budget. We handled it. So this year, let's just do the same budget. We'll handle it again. Faith would say, if God's leading you to do more, do more. And you might say, well, we've never done that before. That's where faith kicks in. I never forget, at a church in the past, one year, we were sort of in that situation. We had gone 10 years, never changed the budget. not much had changed in our church in a long, long time. We actually printed up 2 budgets that year. We printed up a "we can do this" budget. It literally said that across the top. We can do this. And we were saying to the church, look, if you go with this budget, I guarantee you we can do this. And then there was a faith budget on another page. We printed up both. And it was like, look, we're not going to be able to do this one unless God shows up. And we handed them both out to the church. And they got to talk about it for 2 weeks, just like every other church does, and then they voted on it. Do you want the "we can do this" budget, or do you want the faith budget? That church has never looked back since they voted in the faith budget. The biggest increase and change ever happened off the faith budget. And I think the disciples are probably here dealing with the "we can do this" budget. You know, if I just pray for my meals and maybe pray before I go to bed, I'm spiritually good, man. Look at me. I prayed every day. And maybe they're thinking, you know, that I got that. But are they ready for the one that God says, or that Jesus says, you ain't getting this one unless you're serious about your prayer and about your supplication and about your thing? And so I think it teaches us some really important things, y'all. One, for us to take home with, spiritual victories are not sustained by past successes. It's a new battle every single day. It's a new one. Something new comes up all the time. Spiritual victories are not sustained by past experiences. 2, power in ministry flows from a dependence on God. I never forget, I had a seminary professor who, I guess when I was in high school and middle school, I didn't really appreciate what he knew, and I didn't appreciate him, I guess. I always thought he was over my head. And nobody never really connected with him. Well, come time to seminary, guess who's my professor? Him. And I had grown up watching him in church wear wigs, or toupees, I guess it is for men. He had 3. One was a freshly cut one. One was a perfect haircut, and 3 was I need to get a haircut toupee, and he rotated them. So I never connected with him, but right before teaching seminary, he showed up in the church office one day and just took his toupee off. Put on a white T-shirt and wore a black leather jacket. Looked like Mr. Clean to a T. Nobody was allowed to say a word about the lack of toupee anymore. You just went on like it was nobody else's business. And then he invited me. He's like, well, we're both coming from Noonan to go to seminary. Why don't you ride with me? And I'm like, okay, this is going to be boring. And I realized this guy's totally different than before. And he told me one Monday driving to class, he said, man, I made a bad mistake. I never heard him say he did anything wrong before in the past. And he said, my last year at the church was the stupidest year of my whole life in ministry. That year he had announced his retirement. It was basically doing a 1-year retirement tour. And he decided that he was going to preach a series for that year called Preach It Again, Doc. Not that anybody asked him to preach them again, you see, but that he was going to preach his best ones that whole year. It was the driest year in that church's life. And he said, Matt, that was on me. Because what I'm trying to teach you guys in seminary is something I forgot myself, that if I'm not prayerfully depending on God every single day, it's not going to matter. He was taking notes that he had already preached and just reciting the notes again. And they might have been truly great sermons, but he recognized if I'm not prayerfully dependent upon God every single day, then I'm lacking in the power that I need. And so that also teaches then that prayer is not optional. It's not optional for the Christian. And we've got to get to a place where we do more, or at least we understand that it's so essential that it takes more than a quick prayer for our meals, a quick prayer before we go to bed. Prayer is a communication with God that does not end when we get our list of demands out. This is not a hostage negotiation. where we need to spend time worshiping God in our prayer life. We need to spend time thinking about God in our prayer life. We need to spend time praying and praising God in our prayer life. And the very smallest portion of it might be what we ask God for. But just displaying our trust in Him. It is absolutely essential in the Christian's prayer life. And I believe that's one of the things He's teaching the disciples is like you weren't in prayer. And you might have said your, Lord's Prayer, and you might have said your bedtime prayer, but you didn't get into it. And I think that's hinted at when He says prayer and fasting. Because that's a little bit mo. There's a man bought a brand new top-of-the-line power drill. It was powerful, it was expensive, it was designed to handle the toughest jobs, which, by the way, I need one of those. One day, he goes out to build a deck, and he picked up the drill, and he squeezed the trigger, and nothing happened. Frustrated, here's what he started to do. He started to say, this thing's defective. He's blaming the drill. And then he's like, this drill's not strong enough. Maybe I just got a bad one. And then a friend walks over, and because I love the way Chris is grinning right now, Chris would be that friend at my house. He'd walk over, and he'd look down, and he said, it's not plugged in, you big dummy. It's not plugged in. The drill had all the design, had all the ability, had all the potential, but it had no power source. For you as a Christian, that's your prayer life. And I think that's exactly what happened to the disciples. They were called by God. They had been given authority. They had even had past success. But in that moment, I think they were trying to do ministry unplugged. I think in that moment, they were thinking, we got this. We'll just do this. Doesn't require much. They were trying to do it unplugged. In other words, you're trying to do God's work without staying connected to God's power, and that's the important thing of it all. You can have the right calling, you can have the right tools, you can have the right experience, but if you are not connected to God through prayer, you are squeezing the trigger on an unplugged life. It's crazy. I always get myself in these situations. Yesterday, I had a chance to go to lunch with a guy named Will Langford yesterday, and we decided let's just walk someplace. And so we went to Fishtails. We didn't know the Fascinators were going to be there. So we're having lunch, and they're like, look at those ladies with those hats. What's the deal with that? I'm like, yeah, half of them go to my church. And so, of course, Will goes to the bathroom, and then I get stuck putting the fascinator on my head and all that. Because I make the dumb comment of like, well, I guess them things ain't going to fit my head. And then somebody's like, oh, no, it's like a crown. I'm like, great, now I'm going to have to wear this thing, and I'm going to have a picture made. And it's all good, and it's all fine. But I've had a few lunches with guys like that from like the convention level, and they always ask me, they're like, we've been here in this town around your church like a day. Why does it feel like community is so great here? This guy's like been watching all of our Facebook videos, and he works for this like whole area. So he's watching all the sermons. He quotes me in my sermons, and I'm like, "Are you bored? Like, what are you doing?" And they all ask me, like, "What are y'all doing? What are you doing? What's your program? What's your method?" And I was like, I just really believe the Lord when He said, if I'll be lifted up, I'll draw them into myself. And so we got a really good choir, an average preacher, and a great congregation, and it's just working. And they always seem to be shocked when I'm like, well, we didn't do this program, and we're not doing that program. And I always tell them, I'm like, man, we got a lot of stuff we got to straighten out and organize and fix. And I'm like, we're always dealing with something. And I'm just like, man, just every day I think the church is just like, God, do something. Show up somehow. Do something. You don't need a program. So many people, we think we've got to have a 3-step process. How many times would my wife love to just say, hey, go get it done, and me just know what to do? I wonder how many times Jesus looks at us and goes, how about you just get that done? Instead of goofing it up every stinking time. Like, what if we just got to the place where it's Christians? We just knew, I better dig into my prayer life. Because without Him, I'll fall flat of my face. Experience is great. It's helpful. I preached a sermon one time in my first year of preaching that was so bad I have nightmares about it to this day. I decided I was going to preach a sermon about how I prepare for sermons, and I brought like 12 concordances, a bunch of books up on the stage with me, and I bored those people. I bored myself to death. And I thought, dude, you should run me off tomorrow after that. Like, what were you thinking? And so experience has taught me, hey, we ain't going to do that one again. That ain't going to be on the preach it again list. And we're just not doing that sermon again. And so experience can teach us a lot of things, man. And then there's been some sermons that I preached, I thought, oh, they were really good, and nobody moved. And people, y'all should see your faces sometimes on Sunday mornings. Some of y'all, I really believe, think I'm an absolute idiot. Judy, quit raising your hand. And some people are like, I think you think the person next to you stinks because you got your nose. And so if you look at people, you're like, I always like to look at Chris. Sometimes you got a little smirk, like, yeah, uh-huh. And then some people will nod along with you. And then I got Jacob that sits over here on Sundays. I'm going to tell one of Jacob's secrets. He always gives me a word every Sunday, and I got to use that word in my sermon. I don't get the word until 30 seconds before church starts. So I used the word this past Sunday, gobbledygook. That was his word. That's what he was listening for the whole sermon. I'm like, I'll do it. I don't care. I understand. I'm into all that. Experienced it. Past stuff's been good. But there's nothing like every stinking day. You put God first. You plug into his power first, and you'll watch your life change immensely. You don't have a real big habit of going to the doctor and them telling you to take a medicine. You go, nah, I don't think I'll do that. You do it, and you go, oh, I'm better now. Get plugged into God's power source because you don't know what's coming at you. You don't know the next call you're going to get. You don't know the next stress factor, the next storm. You don't know any of that. At the very least, and there may be more to this story than what we can find in just 30 minutes on a Wednesday night. There very likely is, but at the very least, I think Jesus is teaching us to depend on him 1,000%. Or else we're going to be going, why am I back in this situation, Lord? Now, why did that plan not turn out like I thought it would? Because we didn't rely on God wholeheartedly every day. What does the Bible say? We're going to talk about this Sunday, and it just happens to be there. His mercies are new every morning. It's an amazing thing with the Lord. Father, tonight I am grateful that though I messed up yesterday, though I messed up earlier today, you bring grace, and you bring mercy, and you bring forgiveness. And God, you offer us new mercies every day. So God, my prayer is that we would so depend on you that we would fall flat of our face without you, and that we would trust you with everything. We ask it in your name. Amen.